morning.
Good morning.
My name is Antoniewicz, and last year at the auction, I asked for this sermon that Carl's going to give today. So, full circle. But I feel honored that he asked me to share some of my own reflections and why I chose to ask him to talk. The auction last year occurred shortly after the killings of Michael Brown in Ferguson and Eric Garner in New York. My heart was very heavy. I knew this was about more than a racist police officer. It was about a society that tolerates the horrible mistreatment of Black and brown people. And I asked myself, why aren't we farther along on changing all that? How can we be a democratic society that still allows many disproportionately Black children to live in poverty, poor education, etc.? But the biggest question was, how come so many white folks still don't get it that Black folks' experiences, perceptions, and reality can be so different than ours? So I asked Reverend Carl to talk about what's in it for white folks to work against racism. And while much of what I'm sharing is in hope of encouraging my white brothers and sisters to examine our own lives and experiences and take action, I dearly hope that if you identify as Black, Latino, Native American, Asian heritage, that you will feel included. We are all brothers and sisters. Because my deepest dream is a world where everyone is respected as fully human and entitled to a big, full life. I encourage you to be hopeful. Change happens better when we're hopeful. I believe that racism is learned, it can be unlearned, that systems were created by people and they can be changed by people. Indeed, I have come to understand that we are each painfully conditioned into tolerating injustice. But if we join together, we can build the world we dream of. And that many of us can appreciate what it means to be treated as less than. Let's not allow that for anyone. Because one of our sources, as you use, is learning from direct experience, I hope that sharing 3 events in my life will increase your sense of hope and action for racial justice and help you reflect on influences in your own lives. I adored my father. It was great to feel special as the oldest child to be able to do things with him, especially to go fishing on a Saturday morning. My dad would wake me up early. It was kind of an adventure. And I've done this several times when I was 4, 5, 6 years old. And as my younger brother, Pete, who's 2 years younger than me, got old enough, he would come along too. But one Saturday, things didn't come about as I thought they would. I woke up and realized it was late and went looking for Dad, but Mom said he had already left with my brother. They had gone fishing without me. I was not included. Shock, hurt, disbelief, confusion, numbness. I didn't realize it then, but I had concluded that I was excluded because I was a girl. What other explanation could there be? I didn't really question that. My mother did not stick up for me in any way. It's just the way it was. But it was clear to me I didn't count. I was less than because I was female. And the insight was not conscious at the time. I only discovered it later in my 20s when I engaged in some counseling. By that time, I was, big surprise, a staunch feminist, active in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and today, in consciousness-raising groups working at the Women's Center and the DC Rape Crisis Center in support of 2 African-American women who were building a grassroots organization. The second influence has to do with my growing up in the 60s. I was born in 1951, so a lot of the, let's say, ferment, the active days of the early civil rights movement were in the 60s. I was reading the front pages of the newspaper. Loved to read. My parents were avid newspaper readers. John F. Kennedy was our hero president. But there was lots of scary stuff on the front pages about southern states that didn't want Negroes, as we referred to folks at that time, colored people, to go to the same schools as white folks, to ride buses, to eat at lunch counters. There were months and months long filibusters about civil rights, dogs and fire hoses being loosed upon peaceful demonstrators, President Kennedy visiting Dr. King in jail. All these things penetrated my brain. And of course, one day in September 1963, when 4 young black girls were killed in a church bombing. Fast forward to 1986. I was attending a now-sponsored 2-day workshop on unlearning racism. You know, the women's movement was primarily white women. What were we doing wrong? We needed to do more. So this was a thoughtful and a hopeful approach, not blaming or judging. The leader was very wise. The participants were both white and black. And we began with reflections on how we first noticed difference, what was pointed out to us and what we noticed on our own, what messages we were given, and some confusion. I remember my resisting this thing. They're not really black, they're brown and different shades of brown. You know, the little mind that begins to question this stuff, but you're kind of discouraged from really being open about it. Or being told in church that God loves everyone, but then hearing grown-ups talk about colored people. In my family, it was Żyd is the term, Polish term for black. It's like taka Żyd. It's like very negative, derogatory tone. So lots of confusion gets put in there. The workshop posited that every human being is born loving, zestful, creative, intelligent, but that we get hurt. And if those hurts are not allowed to heal, these early experiences as a child are hurtful, we become conditioned in odd ways. And that all of us were painfully conditioned into being dominant in certain areas and target in other areas. That we did the best to resist that conditioning, and that human beings innately wish to be close to each other, and we would never intentionally hurt other human beings if we had not each been hurt ourselves. But these old hurts work to separate us. If we can heal from those, we could be united. This made so much sense to me, for I believe that we were all born good. Think of a little baby. Is that not the essence of goodness? But things happen to us. So at this workshop, I think the group leader noticed that I was having an emotional reaction to all this theory, and she asked if I'd come and stand up in front of the group. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I trusted her. And I'm not sure how she led me to recall these, front-page newspaper stuff, and the piece about the church bombing with the 4 little girls just came really present to me, and I began crying and shaking. I felt terrified. I said, they didn't do anything wrong. They went to church. I went to church. I was a good little girl. If I had been born into a different family, that could have been me. I was so afraid. But I knew it was a turning point for me to have that gut-level experience that none of us are free until all of us are free. So when the leader asked us each to promise that we would look for ways to dismantle racism and work on that, I made that promise, not knowing when, how, where I could do that, just making that commitment. Racism may not be my oppression, but it is my issue. And often I felt inept, confused about what the right thing to do is, and those of you who know me know some of the activities that I've been part of to work on this issue. That commitment has grown as I've learned about some things about how to be a good ally. And if you get on the web, there's lots of wonderful stuff these days about that, how to be a good ally. Number 1 is listening, accepting the other person's truth. They are the expert on their experience. Don't downplay it. Don't say someone's playing the race card. Just listen. Learn the real history. There's some awful stuff done by government and so forth. And be willing to risk, feel uncomfortable, and look a little inept. I also came to see that while women paid a great price due to sexism, that rigid gender roles were oppressive to men. Men are looked down on if they wanted. Well, maybe not so much these days, but they certainly were back in the 60s. Men are looked down on if they want to engage in what were considered female pursuits, child rearing, housekeeping. And worse yet, they could be drafted and sent to kill or be killed. How much more oppressive could you get? just because you're a man. So of course, as a feminist, it was easy to relate to the concept of male privilege, that men often have an advantage simply based on their gender, going for certain jobs, making a certain amount of money, making major purchases. I was very intrigued years later to attend a seminar on white privilege, where we read Peggy McIntosh's now classic article, White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. It was painful to acknowledge that I would very likely be looked at more favorably simply because I was white, applying for a job, etc. I didn't ask for this privilege, I didn't want it, but I couldn't really give it back. But I did have a choice. I could feel guilty for this unearned privilege, or I could stand with integrity and join those working to dismantle the whole rotten system, dismantle white privilege, and work for justice. To me, this is spiritual work, it's personal and relational work, it's collective and institutional work. And at times it may feel scary, but it is part of the journey toward wholeness to build the world that we dream of. I share for your reflections some words from Willa Walker, who's an Aboriginal activist. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together.